The night was settling over Leawood, Kansas, a quiet suburban town where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. But on this particular evening, something sinister was already unfolding, unseen by the people who walked the streets, unaware of the darkness that would soon consume them. Allie Kemp was just a 17-year-old girl, an enthusiastic swimmer with a bright smile and an even brighter future. Her world was full of promise. She had spent the day working at the local pool, lifeguarding, and enjoying the summer sun. By all accounts, it had been a typical day, until it wasn't. It was 10:30 p.m. when the first call came in. A colleague from the pool, someone who had just finished his shift, reached out in a panic. Allie had not returned to her car. The lights of the pool were dimmed, and her vehicle remained parked outside, its engine cold. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a simple miscommunication, a young girl perhaps lingering with friends or taking a longer walk than expected. But something about the tone of the call told me this wasn't just another case of a runaway teen. I arrived at the pool just as the air grew thick with tension. The parking lot was eerily empty, save for Allie's white sedan, still parked in its usual spot. The small community pool, normally a hub of laughter and activity during the day, now stood silent and foreboding in the dark. My team and I began searching the grounds, calling out her name, our voices swallowed by the oppressive quiet. But there was nothing. No movement, no sign of Allie, no sign of anyone. I spoke to the night guard, a man who had been working the late shift. His name was Thomas, and he seemed on edge. His story didn't add up at first, but I had learned long ago to trust my instincts. He told me that he had seen someone lingering around the pool earlier that evening. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, who had stood at the entrance, almost as if he was waiting for something. Or someone. When I asked more about him, Thomas couldn't remember any specific details, just that the man didn't belong there. His presence too deliberate, too out of place. We scoured the area, but there was no sign of a struggle, no clue that would give us any direction. There was nothing that said kidnapping or abduction, just an empty lot, the dark shadows growing longer with every passing second. We called in a search team, and I ordered the canine units to start sweeping the area. I spent the next few hours speaking with anyone who might have seen something, but there were no concrete answers. Allie had simply vanished. It wasn't until the next morning that I received the first break. The pool's security cameras had caught something. The footage was grainy, of course, but it showed Allie walking toward the maintenance area, her blonde hair shining in the flickering light. The man in question was there too, on camera, a blur in the background, but unmistakably present. He watched Allie with an unnerving stillness, his eyes locked onto her with a kind of cold calculation. I knew instantly that this was no coincidence. The man didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he watched her as she made her way to the back of the building, near the pool equipment storage area. He followed her, slowly at first, then more deliberately. The camera caught the two of them disappearing behind the building. That was the last time anyone saw Allie alive. From that moment on, it was all about tracking down the man. We combed through the footage, looking for any hint of a clue, any detail that could help us identify him. The face was blurred, but I could tell one thing for sure. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had been waiting for her, and he had followed her without hesitation. That wasn't just a random encounter. This was planned. I brought in a sketch artist to help create a composite based on the footage. I also started digging into the background of the pool company where he worked. His name, we learned, was Ted Hoover. A maintenance worker for the pool company, he was in his late 30s with a criminal record, a history of indecent exposure and assault charges, though nothing had ever been enough to land him behind bars for long. He had slipped through the cracks before. I was sure this time would be different. Hoover's truck, a tanned pickup, was spotted near the pool on the evening Allie disappeared. The piece of information sent a chill down my spine. We knew he was involved now. There was no longer any doubt. I made the decision to find him, and quickly. But Hoover was gone. We searched for days. We sent out alerts to all surrounding areas, called in his known associates, even tracked down a few ex-girlfriends, but Hoover had vanished without a trace. I didn't care what his record was or how many times he'd managed to slip through the system before. This time he wasn't getting away. By the end of the week, I was beginning to feel the pressure. We hadn't found Hoover, and Allie was still missing. The case was becoming a cold one, and I knew that if we didn't act soon, we could lose any chance of finding her alive. Every minute felt like an eternity. Weeks turned into months. We had leads, but they were always dead ends. A sighting here, a tip there, but nothing solid. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. I wasn't about to let this case slip away. But as the months dragged on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the frustration settling over me. I knew we had to keep the pressure up, keep the public engaged, keep the case in the spotlight. But no one seemed to have the answers we needed. And every day, without Allie, made me feel like I was failing her. Then, in the dead of night, I received a call. It was from a police station in Utah. They'd arrested a man who matched Hoover's description. He was caught in a routine traffic stop, attempting to steal gas. The description was perfect. Everything matched. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, was this finally the break we needed? I flew out to Utah immediately, my heart pounding in my chest with hope. But when we ran Hoover's fingerprints, the results were not what I expected. The man in custody wasn't Hoover. It was someone else entirely. I remember staring at the computer screen, feeling my stomach drop as I processed the news. The DNA test came back negative. The man in custody wasn't our guy. It wasn't Hoover. But the feeling in my gut told me something was wrong. The hunt wasn't over. We were closer than ever to unraveling the truth. But until then, I had to stay focused. Every lead, every tip, no matter how small, could be the one that cracked the case wide open. The arrest in Utah had been a false lead, but it had done something else. It had reignited the fire of urgency inside me. I knew that if we were going to solve this, I needed to think beyond the confines of the investigation we had in front of us. The disappearance of Allie Kemp wasn't just a local case anymore. It was something larger, something connected to a pattern. But what pattern? For weeks after the Utah incident, the case remained at a standstill. We continued to follow up on tips, hoping for something that would lead us to Hoover, or at the very least, a clue as to where he might be. His disappearance remained as mysterious as ever, as if he had vanished into thin air. It was during one of these long, fruitless nights that I received a call that would change everything. The tip came in from a woman in a neighboring town. Just an ordinary call at first. She mentioned something about a suspicious man she'd seen in a truck parked outside a house on the outskirts of Leawood. The description was vague, but it piqued my interest. The truck she described was a tan pickup, the same model and color that Hoover had driven. My instinct screamed that this could be the break we'd been waiting for. I immediately mobilized a team to follow up on the lead. The woman who had made the tip wasn't sure of the exact location, but she recalled the truck had been parked near an abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. It seemed like the kind of place Hoover would hide, isolated, out of the way, perfect for someone wanting to keep a low profile. We arrived at the farmhouse at dusk. The sky had that pale, eerie glow, clouds hanging low, heavy with a promise of rain. The house itself was a shell of what it once had been. A decaying structure with boarded-up windows, cracked paint peeling from the wood. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stepped onto the property. Something about this place felt wrong, like it was suffocating under years of neglect, each creak of the floorboards beneath my boots telling the story of abandonment. We scoured the property. I split the team up into groups to check the main house, the barn, and the surrounding woods. The place was desolate, almost unnervingly still. No sign of Hoover. But then, as I walked around the back of the farmhouse, something caught my eye. Tracks. Fresh tire marks, cutting through the tall grass, leading toward a smaller shed in the distance. I motioned for the others to follow, and we approached the shed cautiously. The door was slightly ajar, and there was a faint smell in the air, a mix of must and gasoline. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise as we neared. It was too quiet, too perfect. I pushed the door open. The inside was cluttered with old tools and machinery, but something else caught my attention. A stack of old yellowing papers lay scattered on a workbench, and beneath them I saw it, an old rusty key, lying out of place. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me pause. I picked up the key, examining it closely. The tag attached to it had a number scratched into it, 5B. I turned it over in my hand, feeling a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't just some random object. It felt deliberate. "Boss," one of my officers called out from the far side of the shed, "you need to see this." I walked over to where he stood, his face pale as he looked down at something on the ground. A large, worn-out duffel bag, half hidden behind a stack of broken crates. My officer carefully unzipped the bag, revealing a set of tools: stropes, duct tape, gloves. Standard items for someone who knew how to keep a victim under control. But there was something more in the bag. A photo. A picture of Allie Kemp, her smiling face staring back at us. Her name was written in ink on the back of the photo. It had been folded and stuffed into the bag. A sick feeling crawled up my throat as I realized the implication. Hoover had been here. He was close. Too close. We secured the shed and searched the rest of the property, but Hoover was nowhere to be found. The key remained a mystery. What did it unlock? What was behind door 5B? There was no time to waste. We needed answers. I made the call to have the property checked against any known storage units in the area, any place where a 5B might be a relevant code. The search would be tedious, but it was the only lead we had. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the image of the photograph from my mind. It was clear now. Hoover had been watching Allie long before her disappearance. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was premeditated. Allie had been his target, and we had no idea how long this obsession had been brewing. The days that followed were a blur of searches, interrogations, and dead ends. But the key kept nagging at me. It felt important, almost like it held the key to everything, and I couldn't stop wondering what it was supposed to unlock. Finally, we tracked down a storage facility on the outskirts of town, just outside the city limits. The manager confirmed there was a locker rented under a name that sounded familiar: Ted Hoover. The locker was number 5B. I didn't need to think twice. We rushed over there, adrenaline pumping through me as we arrived at the facility. The metal doors of the unit stood ominously in front of us, but as I approached, I saw it. The same number 5 etched into the lock. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted the key. It slid in perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. Inside, we found everything. A small room, dimly lit by a single bulb, was packed with cardboard boxes and old furniture. But as we pushed everything aside, something caught our attention. A large wooden chest, its surface worn and weathered. This was no ordinary storage unit. This was a hiding place. The chest felt heavy as I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. I motioned for the others to step back. With one swift motion, I opened the chest. What we found inside was nothing short of horrifying. The chest was filled with dark secrets, each one more chilling than the last. Inside, amid the layers of old cloth and discarded papers, lay several items that made my stomach churn. A few photographs, worn and yellowed with age, were scattered across the top. But it wasn't the pictures themselves that caught my attention. It was the faces in them. Each one showed a different girl, all with expressions of fear and confusion, and in some cases, something darker. One of them was Allie. There was something deliberate about this collection, something unsettling about the way Hoover had kept these memories. He hadn't just taken these photos, he had cataloged them, almost as if he were preparing for something. I sifted through the chest carefully, my mind racing as I tried to piece together the purpose of these items. At the bottom of the chest, buried under the photos, I found a stack of journals, old, leather-bound, and filled with handwritten entries. I felt a rush of cold air as I opened the first one. The first page was dated June 5, 2018. Almost 5 years ago. The handwriting was neat, methodical, but there was an unsettling tone to the words. She doesn't know I'm watching, but I've been watching her every day. She's perfect, everything I need in one place. It's only a matter of time. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I flipped through the pages, skimming over the entries. They were filled with obsession, detailed notes about his victims, about their routines, their fears. Everything was documented meticulously. It was clear Hoover had been planning his crimes for years. He had been building something, building a web of victims, each one part of a carefully laid out plan. And ally Kemp? She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. The journals chronicled multiple disappearances, women who had vanished over the years. Each entry seemed to focus on the same themes: control, power, possession. His fixation on Allie was not unique. She was merely the latest in a series of women Hoover had chosen, and it became painfully clear that his pattern was intentional, calculated. But why Allie? What was it about her that had drawn him in? I sat back, trying to gather my thoughts. There was a feeling deep inside me that we were missing something crucial, something that could connect all these pieces. We had the journals, the photos, and the tools found at the farmhouse, but we still didn't know where Hoover had taken his victims. We didn't know why he had planned for them, and we didn't know why Allie had been chosen to be part of this twisted collection. I called in my team and instructed them to search the journals further for anything that might give us a clue. I had a nagging feeling that the answer was hidden somewhere within those pages. As we scoured through the notes, one thing became clear. Hoover was meticulous. Every detail of his victims' lives was documented with precision, right down to the places they visited, the people they interacted with, and even their favorite places to escape. The more I read, the more I understood. Hoover wasn't just after the women. He was after something more. He was building a shrine, a legacy, and he wasn't going to stop. Then, near the very back of the journal, I found something that made my blood run cold. A list of names. The final 4. Ally was one of them. I had to move quickly. This wasn't just a serial case anymore. It was a countdown. Hoover had set the stage, and now we were racing against time to save the others before it was too late. The weight of the discovery hit me like a sledgehammer. The final 4. That's what Hoover had called them. He wasn't just tracking victims. He was organizing them, each one marked for something far worse than we'd already seen. The final names were clear, but we still didn't know who they were. And without this critical information, the race was on. I turned to the team. We need everything on those names right now. I don't care about protocol. I need those people found. The urgency in my voice was unmistakable. There wasn't time for formalities. We were past that. The time for following the rules had long passed. What we had in front of us was far bigger than a simple murder case. This was a countdown to disaster. The information started coming in, but it was slow, fragmented. There were no solid leads on the other women, but the team worked tirelessly, reaching out to every database, every network that might give us an edge. The minutes ticked by. Each one felt like an eternity. As the search for these women continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were closing in on something far more sinister. Hoover wasn't just a killer. He was a predator with a plan, a strategy, and he'd been executing it for far too long. The hours turned into days, but we couldn't let up. I knew that if we didn't find those women soon, we'd be too late. The faces of the victims from the photographs haunted me. I could almost hear their screams echoing in my mind. their terrified eyes staring back from the pages of Hoover's journals. This man had taken everything from them, and now he was about to finish what he'd started with Allie. We were getting closer. Every new lead seemed to reveal another layer of the puzzle. It was as though Hoover had anticipated every move we might make. His next steps were always one step ahead. He had a plan, and he executed it with cold precision. Then, the break we were waiting for came. One of the names on the list had surfaced, just as we feared. We weren't dealing with a random spree. This was personal. The woman's name was Anna Simmons. She had been a friend of Allie's, a colleague from the pool where Allie worked. She had gone missing nearly a week ago, but no one had put the pieces together. She had become one of Hoover's targets, just like Allie. I felt the room go cold as the realization set in. Anna's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. She had been targeted, and now she was at the mercy of a man who was getting more desperate by the minute. If we didn't act fast, we would lose her. "Where is she?" I asked, turning to my team. The answer came quickly. She had been staying at her mother's house. We had no time to waste. I picked up the phone, dialing the number for Anna's mother's address. "We need to get a team there now. Don't wait for backup. Get there first." I could feel my pulse pounding as the seconds stretched on. We were so close. The search was relentless. My team fanned out across the area surrounding the house, trying to locate Anna before Hoover could strike again. Every moment felt like an eternity. The possibility of losing another victim haunted me. It wasn't just about finding her. It was about stopping Hoover before he claimed yet another life. Finally, the call came through. Anna had been located. She was alive. The relief that flooded through me was indescribable, but it was short-lived. I knew this was just one small victory in a battle that had already claimed too many lives. Anna would be safe, but we weren't done yet. Hoover was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop. With Anna rescued, our focus shifted back to the remaining women on Hoover's list. We had no idea how much time we had before Hoover would move on to the next one. The hunt wasn't over. We were in a race against the clock, and I wasn't going to let any more victims slip through our fingers. The trial was over, but the weight of it still pressed down on me. It wasn't a sense of relief that lingered, but more of a bitter, hollow emptiness. Hoover was guilty, no one could deny that, but I had seen enough cases to know that guilty verdicts didn't always bring closure. They didn't bring the victims back, and Allie Kemp was still gone. As I sat in the interrogation room, I couldn't help but reflect on the hours spent with Hoover, his cold indifference, the casual way he described what he had done. It was chilling. There had been no sign of remorse, no hint of fear. Just a man who felt invincible, a man who thought he could escape the consequences of his actions. But today, in that courtroom, he learned that he was wrong. The trial had been intense. Hoover's defense team did everything they could to cast doubt on the evidence. They tried to attack the credibility of the witnesses, to throw suspicion on the timeline of the murder. But the facts were clear. The DNA evidence, the witness testimonies, the trail of his lies. All of it pointed to one person, Hoover. And the jury saw through the smoke and mirrors. But even as Hoover was led away in cuffs, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. There was still the question of why. Why had he targeted Allie? Why had he acted with such cold, calculating precision? There were no easy answers. He didn't give me any during our sessions together, and he hadn't shown the slightest hint of emotion when speaking of her death. She was just another victim in his twisted game, one more casualty in a life lived without regard for others. For now, there was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for Hoover's appeal, wait for the legal process to drag on. But in the meantime, I had my own demons to wrestle with. The weight of Allie's death would never leave me. It was always there, just beneath the surface, a reminder of the lives we couldn't save. In the days that followed, I would speak to Roger Kemp again. He had started the Allie Kemp Educational Foundation, a cause in his daughter's name. It was his way of honoring Allie, of trying to ensure that no other family would suffer as he had. The foundation would help educate others on self-defense, on how to recognize danger and how to avoid it. It wouldn't bring Allie back, but it was a start. And so life went on. The world moved forward, people came and went, but the memory of Allie Kemp remained. And I would never forget her, or the lessons she taught me. Justice was a hard thing to find in this world, but I knew one thing for sure: I would keep searching for it, for her, and for all the other victims still out there.